A couple weeks ago, there was a video that went viral showing a bunch of rabbits on a trampoline. It was adorable, precious, a rare moment captured on film. Except it wasn't. As it turns out, the video was AI generated. A couple years ago, a photography contest was held where the winning entry was AI. Increasingly so, AI is blurring the line between simulation and reality, between what a machine is able to do and things that we once thought to be exclusive to humans. Every year, the latest generation of AI pushes this boundary ever further. I mean, we are already well past the point where AI can pass the Turing test, convincing us, at least in conversation, that it thinks like we do. So how different are we, really, to these machines? If AI can already simulate art or language, what's to say that it can't one day simulate consciousness? There's this commonly held belief that artificial intelligence will never truly be able to become conscious, since any artificial form of consciousness would only ever be a simulated experience. But what if we had this idea completely backwards? What if, instead of it being impossible for consciousness to exist within a simulated reality, it was in fact only possible for it to be simulated? Consciousness is by far one of the most elusive concepts to grasp. Yet, thanks to rapid advances in AI research and cognitive science, certain pieces of the puzzle are finally beginning to reveal themselves. Today, there is still one major limitation holding AI back from becoming conscious, and it isn't the fact that artificial intelligence is only ever simulated intelligence. In fact, today I wanted to show you how only a simulation can be conscious. So to answer our question, yes, AI can become conscious. And today, we're going to be looking at exactly what would be needed in order for that to happen. There's this song that came out on social media quite recently, and I just thought it'd be the perfect example for us to use in today's essay. So let's just go ahead and hear it.
There were bunnies that were jumping on a trampoline, and I just learned that they weren't real. If a bot can inhabit an unknowing rabbit, it might manufacture the way you made me feel. How do I know that the sky's really sunny? Sometimes it feels like your love is as real as an unknowing bunny.
Right off the bat, this song is so good. It's just such a catchy tune. Kudos to Oliver Richmond, man. This is brilliant. Okay, so what the song is really pointing at here is the line that AI blurs between reality and non-reality. How do I know that the sky is really sunny? If I can't tell the difference between an artificial bunny and a real one, then how can I even know that the sky itself is real? And in that respect, I just wanted to say, it isn't. The sky isn't real, at least not in any fundamental sense, right? All that's really up there is a bunch of nitrogen and oxygen atoms, and when sunlight filters through it, we see it as blue. The sky is not something that exists in and of itself. It is a mental representation that our brains have generated because it makes sense to us. And similarly, there is no such thing as a rabbit. Underneath this model, it's just a whole bunch of individual cells interacting with one another. Zoom in on those cells and it's a whole bunch of atoms bouncing around according to the laws of biochemistry. The bunny rabbit is a zoomed out perspective of a whole bunch of far more complicated stuff that is happening underneath. Stuff which our limited brains just cannot fully understand. Because we cannot see reality at that level of detail, what our brains create instead is a model of representation. Similarly to how in a video game, the character on the screen is a model that is being generated by an underlying bunch of zeros and ones. So too is the sky or a rabbit a model, generated by our brains through photons hitting our eyes and electrical signals firing through our neurons. We never get to see those photons directly, right? We never get to feel the electrical signals. What we get to see is the model. Just like in a video game, we aren't interacting with the underlying zeros and ones. Instead, what we're interacting with is the game's UI, its user interface. In that respect, the bunny rabbit, the sky, every aspect of our consciousness really, exists within a simulation of reality, as a representation of something real. It isn't the electrical signals or the photons or the bits of information themselves, but the representational models that are what matters to us. When Oliver Richman says, "There were bunnies and I just found out they weren't real," the bunnies are real insofar as they are being simulated. And in that respect, at least, every aspect of our consciousness is being simulated. Rather, what he means by this is something that's going to be a little more complicated to explain. Ultimately, what Richman means is that the bunnies have no inner life, no experience of being a bunny. They are pure surface, simulation without anything happening underneath. And that's the crucial point here. Not all simulations are created equal. Some are just appearances, while others carry with them their own perspective, their own point of view. And this brings us on to the real question at the heart of all of this. What happens when the simulation starts simulating itself? Because that, my friends, is where consciousness really enters the scene. In keeping with the theme of today's video, let's go back to another line from the song. If a bot can inhabit an unknowing rabbit. What the line seems to suggest here is that there's some kind of artificial intelligence actually inhabiting the bunny, as if behind the pixels there was a little mind, a point of view, a bunny-like experience. But of course, there isn't. Just like in John Searle's Chinese room thought experiment, where symbols can be manipulated without anyone actually understanding them, the AI is generating the appearance of a rabbit without anything like the feeling of being one. And that's the distinction that I want to make here. Simulating what a thing is like versus simulating what it is like to be that thing. Right now, the artificial bunny looks very much like a real rabbit. The fact that so many people were duped into believing that the rabbits were real is proof that the AI-generated ones share a very strong likeness to the real, tangible kind. In the same way, whenever you interact with a large language model like ChatGPT, its answers can often sound strikingly human. That's why I'd argue that we're well past the point of the Turing test now. In many cases, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between AI and human-generated output. So the question isn't whether AI can look convincing, it's whether it could ever be convincing from the inside, whether it could actually feel like something to be that artificial bunny. In a sense, we already know that AI can simulate the bunny. What we want to figure out now is how it might be able to emulate it. Let's imagine a robot that we've designed to play football. Now, for any Americans watching, football is a game that you play by kicking a ball with your foot. And luckily for our robot, this game also involves a whole load of simulating. So, how might we first go about making our robot good at playing the game? First of all, the robot must be able to simulate its environment. Based on the sensory data that is flowing in through its cameras and sensors, it needs to be able to generate a model of the pitch, the ball, as well as the other players on the field. Then, it must be able to simulate itself within that environment. That means knowing how fast it is moving relative to the pitch, how much pressure its foot is exerting on the ball, and how stable its balance is when it runs. If we translate this back to our bouncing bunnies, the same principle applies. For an artificial rabbit to really pull it off, it would need to be modelling the pressure its paws were exerting on the artificial trampoline, the elasticity of the material beneath it, as well as the relative positions of the other artificial bunnies, so as not to bounce into them. In other words, our simulation wouldn't just be generating the image of a rabbit, but a working model of what it takes to physically be one. And this is about where today's AI is at. Modern systems can model their environments to impressive accuracy, and even themselves to some degree. Whether that's a robot estimating its own position on the field, or an AI predicting how likely its answer is to be correct. This kind of self-modeling is already a big deal, because the moment a system starts including itself within its simulations, it creates the beginnings of perspective. Not just a picture of the outside world, but a picture of where it stands in relation to it. That recursive loop of simulating not only what's out there, but also what's in here, might be the first step towards consciousness as a process of self-simulation. However, there still is a third and final step. In order for our robot to truly become aware, it would need to be tracking not only what it is doing, but what it is trying to do. Am I passing? Am I dribbling? Am I about to shoot? Why am I doing these things? That shift, between merely processing information and representing its own internal goals, may be the bridge between mere intelligence and the beginnings of something like consciousness. And perhaps that's beyond our reach for now. Because while self-modeling can give an AI the beginnings of perspective, a way of locating itself in relation to the world, it still doesn't get us all the way to experience. To bridge that gap, we'd have to move beyond the mechanics of modeling what is, and step into the realm of modeling what is for me. In other words, intentions, desires, goals, the kind of stuff that makes a point of view not just possible, but actually meaningful. Right now, AI can do amazing things. It can predict the world, plan actions, and even estimate its own state within that world. But there's a crucial layer that still remains absent. The system doesn't know how to model its own intentions in any way that matters to itself. AI today can already simulate the model of a bunny, and to some degree, it can even simulate a bunny that is modeling itself. But without simulating a bunny that can model its own intentions, that bunny will never have an inner reason to move, to leap, to jump on the trampoline. Think about it this way. I can watch a chess engine make brilliant moves and even explain its reasoning to me. But the engine doesn't ask itself, why do I want to move this piece? Or what am I hoping to achieve by this strategy? And large language models highlight this gap even more clearly. When an LLM answers a prompt, it isn't weighing its goals or desires. It's performing next token prediction. Given a sequence of words, it calculates which word is most likely to come up next based on patterns from its training data. This process might look like reasoning or wanting. The model might say, I want to help you. But under the hood, it's no different than predicting the cat sat on the... There is no agent that endorses the output. No intention that the system experiences as its own. Take something as simple as color. If you ask an LLM what color an apple is, it might say red, but it doesn't actually know what redness is. It can simulate a description of redness, list wavelengths of light, or even write poetry about the color red, but nowhere in the system is there an experience of red, no qualitative what it is like that anchors that word to an inner perception. For us, red is never just a label. Our notion of redness is bound up in a lifetime of embodied associations. The appetite stirred by the redness of ripe fruit, the horror of gushing blood, the flush of embarrassment or the passion of a lover's kiss. The meaning of red depends on whatever mapping of our internal intentions we have. Without embodied affect, redness has no qualitative meaning. Redness for a human being is a felt quality that bleeds into our desires, fears, and memories. It matters to us because it lives at the intersection of perception, affect, and meaning. For an AI, redness is no more than a statistical mapping, a point in a probability distribution, a symbol connected to other symbols. For us, redness is an experience that tugs at our intentions, shaping what we pursue or avoid. And this is precisely the gap between a system that can describe wanting something and a system that can actually feel what it means to want. Its goals exist only as instructions or optimization functions that we've written for it, not as something that the system experiences or reflects upon itself. For consciousness to arise, an intelligence needs to represent its own goals as meaningful to itself, not just as abstract outcomes. It's not enough to model the environment or itself. The system must also model why it acts, and it must do so in a way that can feed back into its own decisions and self-understanding. In other words, there's a gap between I can do X to achieve Y, and I want X because it matters to me, and I can reflect on that wanting. This is where current models hit a wall. Large language models can simulate perspectives, and even write convincingly about desires and beliefs, but they aren't actually anchoring those desires in an internal self. They can predict what it would be like for someone to want something, but they don't actually want anything themselves. So if you ask, why isn't AI conscious yet? It's not that it's bad at reasoning or that it lacks intelligence. is that consciousness seems to require a self-aware system of intentions, a loop of reflection where the AI can ask itself, what do I want and why? And crucially, that internal mapping of its own intentions can't exist as a bolt-on module, separate from everything else that it knows. It would have to be integrated within the AI's own unified world model, the same internal space where it represents objects, events, and itself. Only then could its goals be experienced not just as abstract outputs, but as lived priorities that shape perception and action from the inside. Until that loop exists, we may have machines that simulate life, simulate behavior, even simulate understanding, but never machines that actually experience what it is like to be alive. And that's the frontier that we're approaching. The question is no longer whether AI can act intelligently, it's whether intelligence without inner purpose could have ever crossed the threshold into consciousness at all. In trying to understand minds from the outside in, it seems that we may have stumbled upon some of the tools for understanding our own minds from the inside out. So, can AI ever become conscious? Well, if consciousness requires for it to be grounded in physical reality, then no. But if consciousness requires simulation, then yes, and in fact, only then. Because to be conscious is to live inside a model. First, a model of the world, so that an agent can make sense of what even exists. Second, a model of itself, so the model generator can see where it stands in relation to that world. And third, a model of the agent's own intentions, so that its goals and desires become meaningful to it, as well as being a part of that same internal framework, giving it not just perception, but perspective. Without these three loops, there's no point of view from the inside. But with them, simulation becomes experience. And experience, no matter how artificial, is what consciousness has always been. So maybe that's the twist that we weren't expecting. That it isn't only AI which is simulating, but us too. We are the rabbits on the trampoline, representations stacked upon representations, an inner theatre stitched together out of models that our brains can never peer beneath. Our love, our fears, our memories, they too are simulated, but they are real precisely because they are being simulated for us. Which brings me back to that final line from the song. Sometimes it feels like your love is as real as an unknowing bunny. At first it sounds like a lament, that what feels so vivid might turn out to be hollow. But maybe it's the complete opposite. Maybe what we call love is real precisely because it is a simulation, folded into the models of self and world that consciousness builds. In trying to imagine how an AI might one day wake up, we've uncovered what makes us awake at all. The fact that only a simulation can be conscious. So maybe the question wasn't whether a simulation could ever become conscious or not. Maybe the deeper question is, wasn't consciousness just always a simulation to begin with, showing us, at last, who we ourselves have always been? Now, we haven't actually answered what consciousness is yet. I have a whole series that I've been working on, and I'm aiming to release another episode every 2 weeks or so. So if you are interested in understanding what consciousness is, then hit subscribe, and we'll try figuring this one out together. Until next one, stay curious.